The house was unusually still that day, the kind of stillness that sharpens your senses to the faint hum of the refrigerator or the distant chirp of birds beyond the window pane. I sat alone in the living room, mindlessly flipping through a magazine I had no real interest in reading. My husband, ever consumed by his work, was away on yet another business trip. I wasn't upset, this had become the norm. Yet, the emptiness he left behind felt heavier than usual. I glanced at my phone, hoping for a message or call to break the monotony, but there was nothing. The silence seemed to amplify how repetitive my days had become, as if routine had woven itself into an invisible cage around me. I loved my husband, or at least I told myself I did, but over the years, something fundamental had shifted. What was once passion had dulled into comfort, and that comfort had slowly morphed into complacency. The slam of a car door outside abruptly pulled me from my thoughts. Peeking through the window, I spotted my nephew, Alison, striding toward the house. She was my husband's younger sister's daughter, though with our small age gap, she felt more like a distant cousin than a niece. Alison, in her early 20s, exuded a quiet confidence and a magnetic charm that seemed to effortlessly draw people to her. Before she could knock, I had already opened the door. "Hey, Alison, what brings you here?" I asked, hiding my surprise behind a smile. She returned the gesture with a grin. "Uncle Jack asked me to grab some documents he left behind. Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Come on in," I said, stepping aside to let her in as she entered. I couldn't help but notice the effortless grace in her movements and the energy she seemed to carry with her. She dropped her bag onto the couch and looked around with a casual air. "Nice place, as always. You've got great taste, Aunt," she remarked with a playful tone. I laughed lightly, waving off the compliment. "Flattery won't save you from trouble. Now, what exactly are you looking for?" She shrugged casually. "Something about property papers. I'll check his study." As Alison headed to the study, I found myself reflecting on how different she was from Jack. Alison was spontaneous, charismatic, and brimming with confidence, the kind of qualities that felt like a distant memory in my own life. Shaking off the thought, I chastised myself for even entertaining such comparisons. After all, she was family. When Alison returned, holding the documents, her sleeves were rolled up, revealing a small tattoo on her forearm that I hadn't noticed before. She caught me staring and smirked. "What do you think? You like it?" "It's interesting," I replied, feeling a bit self-conscious. We ended up sitting and talking for much longer than I had expected. It was the most we'd ever conversed, and her stories were filled with humor, adventure, and a vibrancy that seemed so foreign to me. Her laughter was infectious, and her presence felt magnetic. For a fleeting moment, I was able to forget everything Jack, the responsibilities weighing on me, the unspoken rules that dictated my life. In that moment, it was just Alison and me, two people connecting in a way I couldn't quite explain. The conversation unfolded effortlessly, filling the room with the warmth I hadn't experienced in years. Alison leaned back on the couch, her gaze holding mine just a second too long as she spoke. There was something captivating about the way she listened. Her attention felt genuine, her curiosity disarming. It was almost intoxicating. At one point, she reached for the glass of water on the coffee table, and our hands brushed by accident. The touch was fleeting, but it stayed with me, lingering in my thoughts. I instinctively pulled back, letting out a soft laugh to diffuse the moment, but I could feel the flush rising in my cheeks. Alison noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes probing. "Of course," I replied quickly, standing up in an attempt to create some distance. "It's just warm in here, that's all." I moved to the kitchen, pretending to busy myself with something unimportant. But even with her on the other side of the room, I could still feel her presence. A subtle tension seemed to hang in the air, unspoken but palpable. When I turned back, she was standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame with that same easy confidence that made her so magnetic. "You seem different today," she said softly, her voice gentler now. "Different how?" I asked, doing my best to sound indifferent. "I don't know. More alive." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I was speechless. There was an honesty in her tone that made it impossible to dismiss as simple flattery. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly seen, and that realization both thrilled and terrified me. "Allison, you should probably leave soon," I said finally, avoiding her gaze. "Why?" she asked, taking a slow step closer. "Am I making you uncomfortable?" "No, it's not that," I replied quickly, my voice faltering. "Then what?" she pressed, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. I hesitated, searching for an answer I couldn't find, or maybe I did, but the words wouldn't come. The air between us felt charged, thick with unsaid truths and emotions neither of us dared to name. Alison was standing close, now too close, and I could feel my resolve slipping like sand through my fingers. "This isn't right," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I know," she replied, her voice low and steady, almost a whisper. "But it doesn't feel wrong, does it?" I lifted my gaze to meet hers, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. For a brief moment, the world around us faded away, leaving only the two of us in a fragile bubble of time, where the impossible and inevitable seemed to collide. She reached out, her hand brushing against mine, and I didn't pull away. The room seemed to close in, the space between us vanishing as if it had never existed at all. My mind screamed for me to stop, to step back, to think of the consequences. But my body wouldn't listen. I stayed frozen, unable or unwilling to break the spell. Just as the tension was about to snap, the sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. My heart leapt into my throat as Alison and I sprang apart, both turning sharply toward the noise. Standing in the doorway was my nephew Jack, his face a portrait of confusion and suspicion. "Hey," Jack said slowly, his eyes flicking back and forth between us. "Am I interrupting something?" "No, of course not," I replied quickly, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. Alison was just about to leave. To her credit, Alison stayed calm, her expression unchanging. "Yeah," she said smoothly. "I was just picking up some papers for Uncle Jack." "Didn't expect to see you here though," she added, a touch of casualness in her tone that almost made me believe nothing had happened. Addressing Jack with a casual grin, Alison seemed unbothered, though her nonchalance didn't quite land. Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Ah well, I guess it's good timing then," Jack said, his tone pointed. "Uncle asked me to swing by and pick up the same papers." A wave of unease rolled over me as I realized Alison's excuse for being here was unraveling right before my eyes. Jack's presence was a jarring reminder of how close I had come to crossing an unforgivable line, and shame washed over me like a cold tide. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said quickly, my voice tight as I scrambled to regain control. "Alison already has the documents. You didn't need to come all this way." Jack didn't budge. His gaze sharpened, and his lips pressed into a thin line. "Funny," he said, his tone icy. "Alison didn't mention you'd be here. Guess that detail slipped your mind?" Alison shrugged, maintaining her calm demeanor. "Didn't think it mattered. Aunt and I were just catching up, that's all." The words, while seemingly innocent, hung heavy in the room, their deeper implications impossible to ignore. Jack seemed to pick up on it, his eyes flicking to me and lingering just a second too long, as if searching for something beneath the surface. "Well, I'll let you two catch up," Jack said at last, his tone clipped and cold. He turned and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Alison looked at me, her expression unreadable, the weight of everything that had just transpired pressing down on us like a storm cloud waiting to break.